And we're seeing, you know, coal is brown, oil, which is like what becomes gasoline in our tanks, or our heating oil for our homes, is red. Natural gas is blue. Renewables, which is solar, hydro, wind turbines, that kind of stuff, tidal. Bioenergy is using wood and char and other kinds of products like that, is pink. Nuclear is light blue. And new technology, which is kind of like the catch-all stuff for in case we have a brainstorm. Usually it's fusion is what we think about, because that's the thing. It's like nuclear energy that wouldn't have nasty byproducts. But you can think of it as the flux capacitor, or if we discover vibranium, you know, that's new technology. That's the orange one there. So usually I say that vibranium reference, and I assume nobody knows what I'm talking about, but young kids will know. Okay, good. So the temperature change is what we're looking at over here. And as I said, we started 20 years ago, we were at 0.77 degrees. And here we are at 1.3. These dotted lines are what the IPCC, like the governing body of scientists at the UN, say we need to stay below before we can no longer have control over this, and before we really start threatening, you know, our future, humanity. So 1.5 is the first threshold. Above that, we start losing some bad stuff, like, you know, we start losing our ocean reefs and that kind of thing. And 2 is really bad trouble. And here we are expected at this point to exceed 2 at about 2045, and by the end of this century, if we don't do anything, we're at 4.1. So it's a delicate thing to talk about, because I know, you know, a few degrees doesn't sound like much, but we're talking about sensitive. We're learning more and more about climate is very sensitive. And as things heat, we know that there's feedback loops that'll kind of generate that we'll no longer be able to control. So we can do things by modeling where our energy is coming from. All through here, we've got coal, oil, natural gas, bioenergy, renewables, nuclear, new power, new technology, and carbon pricing. Transportation, how we, not just cars, but also trains, planes, and all that stuff. And both the efficiency of those vehicles and the electrification. Building and industry would be here. So it's like, again, the energy efficiency of those buildings and the electrification of those buildings. Population growth and economic growth, right? Those things we kind of, you know, have a certain amount of control, or maybe not. And then land management, how much trees we cut down, vegetation we cut down, and that's deforestation. Methane is another, that's like the second, after carbon dioxide, is the second biggest driver to climate change. And that comes from farming practices, diet stuff, and also, you know, leaks in natural gas lines, that kind of stuff. And then carbon removal is afforestation here, which is, that's planting trees. That is basically natural means of getting carbon out of the atmosphere, and then technological. Okay, so there's a lot of things I can look at here, but I kind of want to throw it out to you, and maybe Tyler, you could take a look at the chat and see if people have ideas. Here in Maine, or like, you know, in your families, in your conversations amongst your friends and family, what are ideas you might have to try to reduce the temperature increases we're expecting?
No one yet.
No one yet. You have no idea. There's no way we're going to be able to avoid this disaster. Well,
all right, here we go. Now they're plugged in. All right.
Okay.
So I see less coal and more solar panels.
I love it. Okay, good. So let's go with the last one, the one you said there. Solar panels, we would put that under renewables. So each one of these, I should say, you can do kind of a rough estimate by grabbing this big toggle. And I encourage you guys all to play with this afterwards. It's really fun. Or do a deeper dive with these 3 dots here, and I can kind of go through and like look at them and, you know, get more specific about the policy I'm doing. So I'm basically talking about government policies or policies we can do to incentivize renewables, which is kind of solar. Solar is a big driver of renewables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this toggle, and what do you think is going to happen? Actually, I'm going to ask everybody to imagine what's going to happen to these lines here and to global temperature changes when I grab this and highly incentivize renewables. I'm giving people lots of tax rebates or whatever it is to get them to want to put solar panels on their house or buy into a solar lot. What do you think might happen? I'll let you all imagine it since it's such a big group, and I'll just grab it. So I'm going to grab this and move it over. And yes, the green line went up. Awesome. We like that, right? We want renewables because they are carbon neutral. No carbon emitted with that. However, I'm going to go back and show you what it was without it and with it. Look at how much we've shaved off of global temperature increases. We certainly didn't get down to 2 degrees, which we were hoping for. And in fact, the one nice thing is that coal kind of goes down mid-century, which you'd expect, and oil and, well, not natural gas, but oil and coal go down, which is great because those are nasty fossil fuels. However, they start bumping up, or at least coal starts bumping up later on in the century. And the reason for that is, imagine this. Imagine it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to put solar panels on your house, which is great. However, that's going to drive coal down to the make it super, no one's going to want coal anymore. And that's great too. But then all of a sudden coal hits rock bottom prices. And then what happens? Everybody wants coal again because it's cheap. And no matter how cheap you artificially make renewables, coal will eventually, because there's so much of it in the ground, will become attractive again. So people will start digging it up. So that's kind of a bummer, but there's other things we can talk about. Do you have other ideas, Tyler? What about stuff for like transportation?
Actually, several students have thrown nuclear fusion into the mix.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Nuclear fusion. I love that one. In fact, that's huge. That's like news this week. Did everybody read about that? That they think it might be more possible after all. So I'm just going to say I could do a deep dive, but for time, I'm just going to grab this new technology and say like, yeah, we got something awesome's happening. And then all of a sudden this orange thing went through the roof, right? It became predominant. So, whether it's nuclear fusion, the flux capacitor, or vibranium, we got something there. However, it's the same argument with renewables. It starts going nuts. We love that. It takes some of the market share away from coal and oil. However, they're going to bounce back because no matter how great this new technology, this new breakthrough is, that's carbon neutral, carbon free, we're going to see coal go down, but because there's so much of it and because eventually it'll respond to cheapness and prices and make it palatable again, it's going to start going back up again. So even with all that, we got 3.8 degrees centigrade. Okay, how about something in like transportation? Can I offer one up myself? I know I've been talking a lot, but in Maine, we know a lot about where, most of our carbon dioxide is coming from tailpipes, from driving around too much in a rural state. So we can think about like, well, what happens if we just incentivize giving everybody incentives to drive a Prius, or better yet, a Tesla or a Nissan Leaf or something like that, electric vehicle.
High-speed rail.
High-speed rail, I love it. Yeah, high-speed rail. Yeah, okay. So I'm grabbing that and I'm moving that way over. And this is a worldwide model. So you saw that the red line, which is oil, which becomes petrol, what we call gas, goes down. Great. But the big bummer is what else happened? Anybody else notice? Tyler?
Let's see here. Maglev trains just popped in, as well as just renewables, new technology, and no more cutting down of trees.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, I'm going to do those in a second, but just take a look at, I'm going back and forth between no electrification of the vehicles and then highly incentivized. Just watch the chart, Tyler, and since I'm hearing your voice, what are you seeing with these lines when I all of a sudden make a lot of electric vehicles? Check out the brown line.
Yeah.
So the brown line actually goes up. And that's because even though in Maine we don't have any coal plants, worldwide, coal is still a huge driver. Good. So it's still a part of a lot of people's electrical grid. So you may be switching your vehicle in Maine to electric vehicle. That's great in Maine, especially when we have a lot of hydropower and stuff. But worldwide, if we're getting our electricity from coal, no good. That's actually making things worse. So that's why. All right, one more. I heard you say something about afforestation, which is great, or stop cutting down trees. And that's actually something in the lobbying we do. We voluntarily lobby with our senators, with every member of Congress from Ted Cruz to Bernie Sanders. We know that afforestation is something Republicans are talking about because it seems like something they could buy into. So planting a ton of trees, if I move this over, notice it doesn't do anything about where our energy supply is coming from. And it shaved off 1/10 of a degree. So we're still double the temperature increases we want. So at this point, you may throw up your hands and say, holy moly. Notice I'm zeroing out each time. This model is not additive. If I do one thing and then another thing, it's not necessarily the same because there's going to be some redundancies between these. But here, I'm going to switch hats from talking about EnRoads to talking about why we find this so helpful with the volunteer lobbying we're doing. And what the lobby group that I'm in is called Citizens Climate Lobby. And we talk a lot about putting a price on carbon, basically a gradually increasing price on carbon at the point where it is processed. So that means the coal mine or the oil refinery or the natural gas fracking site or whatever it might, fracking well. So, and the bill, there's a number of different bills in Congress, but the one with the most supporters, it has 82 co-sponsors, including our own Shelley Pingree, and we're working on the others, trust us. That, what it does is it puts on a $15 per ton of carbon price, and that gradually goes up every year. Let's assume it starts, next year, 1 year away. And it goes up every year to, for the next, because this model goes out 80 years, I have to model it this way. It achieves, it starts ramping up every year by $10 a year conservatively. It could go up higher if we don't hit certain benchmarks, but that means 80 times 10 bucks a year times 80 years, that's math class 800 plus the initial 15 is $815 by the end of the year. So you can see gradually that price is going up and up and up. And look what it did to, now it didn't get us all the way down 2 degrees. There is no silver bullet. There's only silver buckshot. It's only we got many policies we got to grab. But this does more than any other single policy. And that's why we are so excited about this model. And we're so excited about this idea of putting a gradually increasing price on carbon. Otherwise, we're playing whack-a-mole at the Chuck E. Cheese, which is like, you remember whack-a-mole where you've got like, oh, I've got this problem, I got to hit him. And then he comes up in someplace else. If we don't kind of have something that's economy-wide across all of the different ways we could pollute and force that carbon emissions down, we're not going to get ahead of this. So that's why we're excited about this. And we actually have 82 co-sponsors, and it's bipartisan. Both parties have signed on to a degree. So that's this in a nutshell. I'm going to encourage everybody listening to this I'll share this link. It's all free. They've done this out of the goodness of their heart, and they want to profligate this, to send this out to as many people to play with so that they can see what needs to happen. After this, I can go and do things. Let's say now we have that carbon fee in place. There's no way for pollution to kind of squirt out in ways we don't want it. So I might do something like check out, well, this is kind of a deeper dive, but let's say, whoops, where are our big greenhouse gas drivers? If we did something like this without the carbon fee, that charcoal color keeps on going up. That's carbon dioxide. With the carbon fee, by the end of the century, it's no longer the primary driver. I'm looking at different kinds of greenhouse gases at this point. And that's the gray is the one we're worried about. Charcoal gray is carbon dioxide. But by the end, it's like methane. So we can start dealing with methane at this point. And then we can start planting some trees and maybe slow down how much we're cutting and maybe have some technological solutions. And we can see that we can get below that 2 degrees and close to 1.5, even before we start talking about making like, electric vehicles and tightening up our buildings and that kind of stuff. It's getting nicer the more I do. But the important thing is that stuff wasn't possible without putting that ceiling, that price, gradually increasing price on carbon. Whew, I talked for a long time, but let's talk about I'm going to switch over now to talking about how this legislation works and what we can do as Mainers. And actually, we have more pull than you would imagine as Mainers to try to do something, to try to get something like this installed. But I want to break a little bit just to talk to you, ask Tyler if there's any pressing questions.
We had a student who really wanted to talk about nuclear fission, just kind of threw out various points in the chat there.
Yeah, so I can address that. Nuclear fission, sorry to break you off, Tyler, but nuclear fission would be this one, because that's what we do already. So I could grab this and move it forward. Let me actually go back to like resetting everything. We're back to, this is back to business as usual and just looking at nuclear, I could just bump that up. And it has the same kind of problem where, yes, it does cut things down and it should be part of our portfolio of things to do. But it's because, if we really ramp up nuclear, which is, arguably could be a good thing because it's carbon neutral, it eventually coal and other things will start bouncing back up because it's cheaper again, just like with renewables and other things we're talking about. Go ahead, Tyler.
And another student actually just chimed in with, what about battery waste from car batteries, like for electric cars? Like, how will that affect things?
Right. Well, this model doesn't look at this because this is laser focused on climate and climate only. So battery waste actually doesn't have any kind of like CO2 emissions. It's got other pollution that we got to worry about. Just like, nuclear we got nuclear waste we have to worry about, or, unless it's fusion, which is a different story. So this model doesn't really get into the other byproducts, but that's a part of the conversation for sure. And it's something that you keep in the back of the mind as you're looking at this. But this is laser focused on on climate change, because that's the one that's kind of existential, right?
Yeah.
And by existential, that's just a big word meaning if we don't get this right, we're in trouble, kind of. So, sorry, Tyler.
Oh no, you're good. And a lot of things coming in the chat here. People were just asking, one of the bars there for public transport, like how does that affect things?
Sure. Okay, so I've zeroed back out to business as usual. And if I do public transport, I could just talk about, I think that's under energy efficiency. So there's, let's see. So public transportation just basically means like we're going to have more riders per vehicle. Per engine running that's pumping out carbon dioxide, we've got more riders. So you could basically, I think there's a way of detail of doing it through these 3 dots, but I'm just going to grab it quickly and do this just to see what it looks like. And okay, shaves off, nothing to balk at, but it doesn't save us. But on its own, and nothing does save us on its own. But my point, and the point I'm bringing across with this is that we need a large variety of stuff like right now to try to avoid disaster. And the other point is that this carbon price, which is not sexy or super, people don't think of, the sexy thing is like, I want to put solar panels on my roof and put a windmill in my backyard, which is great if you're wealthy and can afford it. But most people can't, and with only that, we're not going to avoid disaster. We need to have it part of this thing where we're actually keeping economy-wide, putting a thumb on the scale to keep people from pulling coal, oil, and gas out of the ground.
Okay, and then in the chat was, okay, audio was weird. All right, please explain more what you mean by bipartisan and why it matters.
Okay, that's a great question. So I'm going to get into that in a second. And I'm going to use that as my cue to step away from this model. I know this is brief. I'm only scratching the surface on this. Okay, let me put a pin in your question because I'm going to use that in just a second. But let me just show you 2 things before I leave this model for good. And I encourage you, when you guys do your breakout sessions or whatever you want, or even if you don't do the breakout sessions and you don't want to deal with this anymore, play with the model on your own and see what you come up with, because I'd be very curious to see what you find. But one of the nice things is I bring this model to all kinds of different groups, from all kinds of political ideologies, from the democratic socialists, Marxist guys in the DSA in Portland, to like super conservative folks on the other side. And a lot of people will ask you, like, tell me about your assumptions. Like, you're plugging these all in, like, what are the assumptions that are going on? And that's the beauty of this model, is that I can actually play with those assumptions. I could do all the things I just did by changing around some of this, maybe the assumptions, maybe the climate is more sensitive or less sensitive than I might think. Or, we could utilize fossil fuels better, or carbon capture effectiveness is going to be better, or progress ratio. This is one of my favorites, which is like totally nerd, this is like climbing nerd mountain with me, but progress ratio is basically, how much money you invest into a different fuel source gives you a return on what that investment means for innovation. So it's like, basically the lower the number, the lower you're going to have, the higher increases in innovation and better effectiveness of that new fuel. So we can play with that as well. It doesn't really change that much around from the overall points that I just showed you. You can also look at something called like the Kaya graphs, which kind of shows us where are all of the, where are our assumptions coming from? So global population for the next 80 years, past 20 years, next 80 years, you can see the UN, this is what the scientists think, who knows, but it expects us to kind of crest off at about like 11 million people by the end of the century. GDP is going to keep on going up. That's good. That's bringing people out of poverty. And energy intensity of the GDP is going down. You can actually see the little blip from the 2008-2009 economic crisis right there, because it's part of history. But then after that's like kind of a gentle slope going down. That's also good. Carbon intensity of that final energy, if we just multiply these together, brings us to this. Carbon emissions from energy keeps on going up because we have so many more people. So, this, like I said, we are just scratching the surface of this. You can see all the sea level rise, cost of energy, all that stuff. All these things are available for us within this model. And one of the nice things is if I actually put that carbon fee in place. If I put that carbon fee in place, the cost of energy does go up at first, but then it levels off. And the reason being is that all of these things are being driven, the move to renewables and all that stuff is happening already, so that we can keep on ramping up the cost on carbon, and it doesn't really affect people's pocketbooks because after a certain while, we've moved to renewables. Okay, so now I want to switch over and talk to what we were saying about my little handy dandy slideshow. So what happens, I'll just ask this, if we just raise the price on carbon like this bill does, there has three parts of this bill. The first part is the gradually increasing cost on carbon, which I've hopefully somewhat convinced you that it's something to think about because it does more than anything else. If we just had that, what do you think is going to happen to me? Imagine like you're a poor, struggling artist, let's say, and you got a beat up truck that you carry your art around, or let's say you're a musician like me, and you bring $2,000 worth of gear in a $500 car 50 miles to make $100, right? That's not going to make sense. It's going to really hurt you when carbon prices keep on going up and makes the gas at the pump going up. So what they've done is the second part of this idea is they return all of this money, all of it back in an equal check to each and every person. If you're under 18, you get half of a credit. So the idea of that is, it's like you're kind of like taking money away from me, but you're giving it right back to me. But it's giving it back to me evenly and taking away depending on my carbon footprint. So it creates an economic model where we are being incentivized to bring down our carbon emissions. Not just us individually, but also all the companies that feed us the products, that feed us our, everything from our healthcare to our houses to our hamburgers, okay? So, and now I'm gonna jump into some economic studies about what this has done. And I promise this won't be boring, but it's interesting. So, like I said, it takes the money away from at the point source where the fossil fuel has been extracted, and then gives that money, the net revenue is given back to an equal lump sum. This may seem unfair. If I'm super poor, I get a check. I get the same dividend check that Jeff Bezos gets, right? However, Jeff Bezos pays a whole lot more into this pot of money because he's got private jets and he's got a big company that pollutes a lot, and he's probably got an outdoor heated swimming pool in Siberia in the wintertime, right? He just does a lot of like dumb stuff with his money probably that he doesn't think about because he doesn't have to pay for this yet. But if this carbon fee was in place, he would be shelling out lots of money into this. So that means more money for poor folks like me. And you, if you're poor. Okay, so what would that do? This slide is old. This needs to be updated, and I'm trying to get them to do this. But basically, what it does for the environment, it would, within the first decade, it would save, it's actually up to they've redone this model because with more recent data, and it's up to 450,000 lives a year that it would save. For that decade. And that's not just from like climate change direct stuff like dying of heat exhaustion and stuff, but it's also from all of the associated diseases that come from burning fossil fuels: asthma, respiratory diseases like that. You know, a lot of stuff that hurts poor and low income stuff folks especially. This carbon fee and dividend idea would also have us exceeding our Paris Protocol goals within 8 years. Those big things that we worked so hard under the Obama administration to meet, without any kind of government mandate, would get us exceeding that within 8 years, and every year after that doing that much better. How much money do you get back? The average family after the first decade gets about $4,500 back. That's not chump change, right? And that's exciting. And that in turn, that money going back to people creates jobs, because those people now have money to spend to fix their porch or to fix up their car or whatever, that they spread around to the businesses that are willing to do that for them. So it creates 2.1 million jobs is what it's what is projected according to the latest independent studies. Okay. This graph, I don't know if you guys like graphs, but here's a graph on the left of what this does nationwide, depending on your income level. So here I am in the bottom 10%. I'm actually not down here, but if, you know, I'm doing fine. Don't worry about me. But if you were at the lowest 10%, you would do predominantly well. This is your after-tax income level. Now I really sound like, you know, a middle-aged white guy, right? After-tax income does much, much better over here. And this is on average. Of course, there's going to be anomalies, but on average, everybody is going to make out better until someplace around 60, 70% from this idea of giving that money back that you pay in from carbon trade. And then the richer people, these are the guys who can afford to decarbonize their lifestyle, so we don't all, you know, burn on a hotter planet, and they can, you know, and they have the means to do so because they're wealthier. Here's a map of state. I think this is fascinating. They did this, broke this down state by state. So this is a pretty picture of like Maine here. So up on the graph of the top, it shows you the scale. So it's like on the blue is the folks who do more households on average do make bank on this. And then the richer parts of the state, like the coastal elites, like us here in Portland, it's about 50% of us will make will do better. And then, like I said, it's because there's more money, and so there's more means to move away from that carbon pollution. Does that make sense? Should I stop and ask for questions, Tyler?
We did have one question, which is, so if everyone lowered their carbon emissions, wouldn't we get paid back less?
You would, but that would be a great problem to have, wouldn't it? I mean, think about it. That's the whole goal, right? So this is actually, there's some pushback on this. So the language of the bill, that's a great question. So the language of the bill states that this continues, this gradual increase in carbon price continues until we reach 10% of 1990 CO2 levels emissions. So that's really small. And that's something that the world can manage. Which this is the same as 2015. Actually, like United States levels of carbon emissions has been kind of like, it kind of peaked in like the early 2000s and went back down in around 2015. So if once we get there, then that carbon fee can kind of scale away. And everybody, by then, industries just like assumed that we're moving away from carbon just because it's easier, and the research has been done to do that. Great question.
And then another person asked, are fossil fuels less than just gas or coal?
I'm sorry, you broke up there. Say it again.
Oh, yeah. Are fossil fuels less polluting than just gas or coal?
So fossil fuels is the umbrella in which we put oil, gas, coal, and even bioenergy, which means burning wood pellets and stuff like that. There is different life cycle carbon contained in each one of those. The worst is coal. No big surprise there. The good news is that in this country, it's getting it's losing market share all the time. There's only 70,000 coal miners left in the country. It's like very, very small. Worldwide, that's a different story. Australia, when it was on fire, still sent even when it had its record wildfires in February. I don't know if you saw it in the news. Kind of like California's on fire now, Australia's on fire. Their primary export at that time was coal, which is a bummer because it's just fueling the fire. But coal's number is the worst. After that is oil, natural gas is third. So the fact that coal is losing out to natural gas in the United States is good, but it can't be permanent because natural gas, it has about half the contained carbon embedded in it. We need to move further away from it to like no carbon at all, because it's too late. Good question.
And then there was another one here. So aren't the lower income people living in the red area of the map though? Portland's rich compared to locations up north, but most immigrants and others with less means live in Portland, so the red area will not benefit but actually lose.
Well, no, okay, so the red doesn't mean, don't get scared of red like it's Miss King marking up your paper with red because it means you got everything wrong. It's actually just, it's 50% of those folks will make money on this product, on a project like this. So still 50% of the people here are doing better. And the other 50% need to be incentivized to decarbonize their lifestyle. Okay, so you're right, that's true, but there is more rural poverty in, like on average, if you took the average household in Solon and found out what its income level was, because there's, yes, we have more homeless and we have, in Portland, we have more people with low income, but the rich people are so predominantly rich that they actually throw the scale off to making that like, it's actually on average much wealthier in Portland than it is in Solon, if that makes sense. They're the kid that got 100 on the test that everybody else averaged on like a 35 on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And then there's another one here. Oh, I don't know what's going on with my audio. This is very hopeful. Who made the model and how did they do it?
Great question. So it took 5 years to make the model. We first heard about it a little more than a year ago. They wouldn't let us play with it yet, and I was dying to play with it. I had toy envy. But and at that time, actually, the carbon pricing actually did even better. It got it down to like 2.15 or 6, and now it's 2.8 with the bill. So they built in some conservancy in there, I think, because it had to go through this very rigorous, gauntlet of peer review, which is what scientists have to do, right? It's like, I have this study, I want to make sure it follows everything, and then they open it up to the public of like, this gauntlet of nerds in trench coats who are going to lash it with kind of criticism until they make it more robust. But it's basically the folks at MIT and Climate Interactive. So you can go to their website and actually see the names, but it's like the latest and greatest researchers on climate and the interactive, it's called system dynamics, how these things react with the economy and everything.
Okay.
If there's I keep an eye on those questions. I'm going to jump back into this because I just give my voice a break, but here we go. I'm going to keep going. So that money coming back to folks, what does that look like? So, everyone thinks when you're talking about increasing the price on carbon, that's going to hit you or hit your parents in the oil they pay for their heating oil or natural gas, depending on how they heat their house, and the gas they fill their car up with. But that's only the bottom, that's blue and light blue. That's for each of the income levels here. It's actually less than half of the embedded, like predominant carbon footprint is embedded carbon, which means the stuff that is the carbon that goes into making my clothes or making my food or giving me my healthcare or getting the service provider to me or whatever it might be. All these stuff that it's like, it's kind of harder to figure out where the carbon comes from. That's where all of these, everything above this blue to light green line is the secondary sources. So even if I don't do anything different with that dividend check, if I don't take that dividend check and invest in solar panels for my house, still buy like a gas guzzling clunker, because that's all I can afford, all of the businesses around me, they're much more sensitive to these price fluctuations. They will want to bring that down because they want to save money before it comes to me. So even if I don't do anything different with my dividend check, the businesses community will move into a carbon. That's where the big carbon savings is. This is a map of the world. Yeah, Captain Obvious. This is a map of the world with all of the countries that currently have a carbon pricing mechanism in place. Different kinds. So it's like either participates in a regional carbon pricing like Europe does, or has one coming through, coming down the pike, or is considering one, or has domestic one. Whoops, sorry, someone say anything?
May of 2019, and as always, you can find all of the downloads in the description below. So anyways, let's go ahead.
Is that happening in my head, or is that?
Nope.
Okay.
Found it. Someone got
Just making
unmuted.
sure. Okay, just want to make sure I wasn't going crazy. All right, so these are, so you can see United States doesn't yet participate in a carbon pricing thing. And we share that with what? Russia, Belarus, what else we've got? We've got Myanmar, we've got Somalia. Not to badmouth these countries, but it's like not the global drivers that are, we're late to the game, in other words. In fact, 80% of US trade, international trade, is done with countries that already have a carbon price involved. We actually, the third part of the bill we talked about, so the first is the gradually increasing price on carbon, give all that money back to every person, no companies, just people. And then the third thing it does is it protects it. If we have imports coming from a country that doesn't have a carbon price, let's say, so Libya is right here, right? Libya is making steel, which they don't, but let's say they made steel and they send to us. We would impose a tariff on them, the equivalent of what it would be if that steel was made in the United States, which does two things. It protects American businesses so they don't have to compete with somebody who doesn't have this carbon price, but it also exports the policy. We want to make sure Libya is going to adopt their own carbon pricing, and they will if they want to play without getting tariffed. So that's what that means. Where has this carbon fee and dividend or carbon cashback idea worked in the past? Well, the answer is everywhere it's been tried. Our favorite example is north of us in British Columbia. All of the different Canadian provinces, the Canadian states, had given a mandate 15 years ago to get their carbon emissions down. And this is exactly what British Columbia came up with. A gradually increasing price on carbon, give the money back to the people. Carbon cashback or carbon fee and dividend. And since that was imposed, it's been amazingly successful. Their economy, even though they're pricing carbon, their economy grew by 12%, which outpaced the rest of the nation's average. They did better than the national average, and their emissions went down twice as fast as the nation as a whole. It's such a, it was such a huge, success, and it's amazingly popular amongst British Columbians because they got this check in the mail, and it didn't really matter that price of gas went up by 10, 12 cents on a gallon. It was so successful that Prime Minister Trudeau has now made it the default policy for all of Canada. So Prime Minister Trudeau, otherwise known as in my house as Prime Minister Dreamboat, installed this capacity for all of Canada so that they now have this pricing carbon fee and dividend for all of Canada. This addresses the bipartisan thing. I'm sorry to be so long to get to it, but here it is for the student who was interested. We are beginning, Citizens Climate Lobby has been working to try to get more and more political folks to start talking about this idea, carbon fee and dividend. And what they've done is, we've done some research to find out that, well, at first, it was only Democrats would talk to us. Republicans didn't want to even talk about the fact that there was not to be partisan, but they didn't want to talk about climate change. Now they're talking to us. We're having conversations of the 535 senators and representatives. We've had conversations recently with 531, almost all of them. And the reason why the Republicans are opening their doors to us is contained in this graphic. So this is actually a data from the Luntz polling group, which is a Republican kind of polling group, showing that when carbon fee and dividend is explained to Democrats, 80% of them support it. They like the idea. That's very, very popular. When it's explained to Republicans under 40 years old, it's almost the same thing. It's 75%. You see that top right? I can't see my cursor anymore. Okay, there it is. Yeah, 75%. So the Republicans are beginning to talk to us because they realize the future of their party is almost as freaked out about climate change as Democrats are. It's like a bipartisan issue. It doesn't matter how you vote. Climate is a problem. So this gives us a lot of hope and is why we have some Republican support. Not as much as we'd like, of course, but we'd like more Democrat support as well too. So that's exciting. I'm almost done with the slideshow part of this, and then I want to open up to like a lot of questions, and I'll go back to the model. This is pictures of what we do. So, well, let me start on the left. So this is a statement signed by over 3,500 different economists, which never happens. That many economists in the United States don't agree on anything. And what they've outlined here is they're saying that with the model we have, or with the economy we have now, market capitalism, this is the most effective and equitable way for us to get to a clean energy future. And this is signed by economists who are super right-wing, like University of Chicago economists on one hand, and like downright Marxists from like University of Massachusetts Amherst. So all political fields kind of agree on this one thing, which is something that they've never done before, including all living chairs of ex-chairs of the Federal Reserve, Nobel laureates, yada, yada, yada. So this is what it looks like when we do what we do. This is from last summer when Shelley Pingree, this is my daughter thanking Shelley Pingree for becoming the first Maine representative to endorse carbon fee and dividend. She's one of the 82 co-sponsors in the House. This is us with meeting with Angus King. He is getting closer and closer. I think he's hopefully after the election, no matter what happens, we'll see him being a supporter. This is us meeting with Susan Collins. Susan Collins is actually very interesting. She's a Republican we have in our sites. It's important to have this be some bipartisan support because we really want to make sure that if it's just a Democrat bill, what's going to happen is, let's say Biden wins and the Democrats sweep in the fall, and this becomes a Democrat-only bill, and there's no Republican support. Well, then in 2 years, what usually happens is the Democrats don't bother showing up to vote in the midterm elections when the president's not up, but Senate and the House is. And they'll, if we learn anything from the past, just like in 2008, everybody voted for Obama. Nobody voted in the 2010 midterm elections, so Obamacare has been a big a big thing to fight over for the next 10 years. And that's because it was only Democrats. They couldn't get Republican support. If you get even just one Republican vote, allows it to be called bipartisan so that it won't get the slings and arrows as like a partisan fighting thing, which is what we don't want. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I explained that well. But maybe just look around the pictures. Are people nodding? So that's the reason why we need Republican support, is so that it'll be robust, so that no matter what happens in future elections, when Democrats don't show up in midterms, go vote during the midterms, then they will, it's so that we can have something that is not going to be around for just 2 years, but it's going to be around for a long, long time. So anyways, Senator Collins actually supported something even more progressive than this in 2008. And she didn't get the support she deserves. And I know, she's a complicated and controversial figure, but we're hopeful that no matter what happens, should she lose and become a lame duck in November or wins for another term, we're hoping that she could be persuaded to get not even all the way, but most of the way back to how progressive she was in 2008 when she supported something called a cap and dividend, which is similar to what we're talking about now. Okay, that's it for talking politics. Here's a map of the world. The past 100 years, these are the culprits for who has created most of this carbon dioxide problem, where the carbon emissions are coming from. You can see it's mostly us, Russia, China, Europe, right? And where are the climate change deaths coming from? They're averaging now at about 150,000 deaths per year associated primarily or secondarily with climate change. And look where it's coming from. It's almost a mirror, image. It's the exact people who have contributed the least to this problem are the ones who are taking it on the chin. So not to beat that point too much, but it's like a moral mandate that we're, and that's not going to stay that way, of course. It's now, we have climate refugees in this country now because of California and Alaska permafrost melting, but that's the reason we should be doing this. Here's some more pictures of us meeting with Shelley Pingree, some young people we brought down. Young people are fantastic lobbyists. When they see somebody my age walk into the room, they figure this guy's got some sort of angle. He wants me to do something for him, or he's been poisoned by the political system. When they see a young person come to DC or appear on a Zoom call, as Danielle White, who I know is our intern who's on this call, can vouch, it really does open doors. It also gives them a living proof of this is who I'm voting for. Climate's affecting all of us and immediately, but it's going to, it's going to be more and more affected in the future. So this is a persuasive meeting where we had a bunch of young people meet with Representative Pingree, and she became an endorser after this meeting. And then these are not an extensive list, but these are all the different companies and endorsements that have supported, from all kinds of different ideological stripes, supported carbon fee and dividend or carbon pricing. And this is the last slide I promised, but this is a picture of us after our last meeting, Citizens Climate Lobby. And I just want to end with this quote from James Hansen, who was the climate scientist who appeared in 1988, the first guy to talk about climate threat before Congress. And this is the meeting actually in which young Senator Al Gore became a believer, that the big champion of this. And he says, most impressive is the work of Citizens Climate Lobby. That's us, 180,000 volunteers across the world. If you want to join the fight to save the planet, to save creation for your grandchildren, there is no more effective step you can take than to become an active member of this group. So with that, I would just say, so what can you do as young Mainers here? Well, you can talk about this amongst your friends and family. If you know businesses, if your family owns a business, they should be, every time, what we do is we act as an intermediary between our lawmakers and the folks in the ground. And if the folks if our lawmakers don't hear from their voters that this is important to them, that they want to put this price on carbon and give the money back to folks, it's going to be a harder push to get this, harder sell job. So we need more and more people talking about this, and you can go to the bill's site, energyinnovationact.org, and click on endorse. You can endorse as an organization. If you're a company, we've gotten all kinds of Revision Energy to Copy by Design to all kinds of local endorsements. Baxter Academy, we would love to have their endorsement, considering they are a member in good stead of the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce. Maybe the students could encourage Baxter Academy to endorse, or whatever it might be. I'm just only pulling your leg, but it would be great, all of them. And it takes about 20 seconds to fill this out, and it's just another name, another piece of paper we can give to King, Collins, Golden, and Pingree, along with all the others, saying that there's more people hoping to have this carbon fee and dividend. Okay. I've spoken for a long time, and I'm hoping that there's some questions. I'm hoping that this has created a little bit of an interest in what we do, the model, the policy, and the politics and kind of the civic action we can take by spreading word about this and getting people to talk about this. So I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a conversation and not the end. But I'm a resource at your mercy. If you have people that you would like to talk to, or companies that would be persuasive, or if you would like to participate in a meeting with Senator King, Senator Collins, we would love to have your help with that. So I'm going to turn it over to Tyler, and I want him to pepper me with your questions.
All right. And we do have. Is that sounding weird for everyone else? I don't know.
I can hear you.
Cool. First, awesome. Let me see here. So one of them was, and I think it was from a little bit back. How many countries are on track to meeting their goals of those countries you were talking about earlier that are working on them?
Oh, of the 2015 Paris Protocol goals? Yeah, it's not a pretty picture. It has been a challenge. Let's put it that way. So even the ones who have we're the only country to back out of Paris Protocol goals after Trump decided to do so on May 1st, 2017. Wait, not that it bothers me, but but even with the ones that have stayed in, they're not meeting their goals. I don't know the percentage, but it hasn't been good.
Okay, and then someone just said, can you ask him to talk about the Paris Accord?
Okay, so that's Paris Accord was great. So that kind of talked about it right there. It's nothing more than a piece of paper shared by the highest reaches of the international governing bodies. So the UN, the US, all these things. It was a fantastic thing to have happened. Science knew that it wasn't enough. It wasn't, even if we did reach our goals, which we're not on track to meet, it wouldn't be enough to avoid what the scientists are saying is the worst case scenarios. So it's something to celebrate that we got to that point, but it's also something to be, it's a starting point and not the end, because we kind of gave it, it's a way of giving it lip service without giving it much teeth. In fact, most of the international community wanted to give it teeth so that it would have to be ratified by different individual governments so that they would be forced to stay within their limits. And they backed away from that for one and only one reason, which is because of the US Congress. We are the only nation left in the world with one of our political parties not acknowledging the threat of climate change.
Awesome. And then I got, what does moving to renewable energy mean for the car community?
It's actually, that's a great question. There's, when you talk to, you would think that gradually increasing prices on carbon, which is the way we want to get to move to renewables, right? Otherwise, it's going to be that whack-a-mole thing where there's going to be leakages and stuff. You would think that that move would hurt car companies and that they would be opposed to it. But we know that, and not to mention big oil, like, those kinds of folks. There are some companies that are going to be opposed to it no matter what. Coal companies predominantly, because they are the dirtiest of all the fossil fuels. But for big oil companies, they've gotten many more years out of polluting the atmosphere than they originally thought. When this came to the front in the 80s and the science was kind of settled then and in the 90s, they thought their mode of doing business was cooked. Mm-hmm. And here they are getting an additional 30 years out of it. So they actually have been preparing and waiting to transition to a renewable future, not, without some fight, because they're making money this way. But when we saw, for instance, when the White House wanted to prevent California from upping its standards for greenhouse gas emissions requirements for California, which has the strictest and the most ambitious in the country, the General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, they all actually were fighting the White House on this. They wanted to keep those CAFE standards because they actually had already done the investment to move towards more efficient vehicles. The same thing with big oil. If you have the capacity to build offshore oil derricks, then you also have the capacity to build offshore wind turbines. So the big companies actually will make money in different ways by in a renewable, in an economy that features almost exclusively renewable energy, because they've been planning to do this for a while.
And actually, that student provided clarification that they meant more like car enthusiasts, petrol heads, folks who really like their cars.
Yeah, I don't know really what to say about that. I don't know if that student has ever been in an electric vehicle before, but I got a ride in a Tesla once, and the pickup on a Tesla drove my head into the headrest so hard, because there's no, it actually was kind of a bummer to switch to an old gas car, because it felt like marching back 100 years technologically, because there's no hesitation between putting your foot on the gas and really taking off. The pickup is insane on that. I would encourage that student to, if they have any means, put a false mustache on, go into a Tesla dealership and see if you can get a test ride.
Okay, and then someone just asked, can you show what the carbon price would look like if nuclear was turned all the way up?
Sure, yeah. Okay, give me a second. Maybe you can read the next one, because it takes me a while, just because it's clunky the way this model works. So do you want me to, does that student, I'm going to put the carbon price in place first, and then nuclear. And they're talking about not fission or fusion, new power, current.
I believe they're talking about fission.
Okay, yep. So here's our model again. Sorry, it's going to start like this.
And if you wanted another question while you're playing, they asked, what if we used our oil reserves instead of constantly pulling new oil from the ground?
Yeah, that wouldn't last long. And we have emergency oil reserves for if something, there's a national emergency or something, and that's supposed to not take us more than a few months, which is a blip of time. So if we did that, they're there for the reason to try to make the economy robust to sudden stresses like a war or natural disasters or something. So here it is with that. Sorry, going back to the previous question. This is this with only the carbon fee, right? And he wants me to drive up nuclear. Is that what you said?
Yep, all the way.
Or she? Okay. So it shaved off an additional 1/10 of 1 degree, which is nothing to balk at.
I think they were curious if it affected the price.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. So here's what, and I'm glad you said that, because so here's the cost of energy. The carbon fee is going up. You saw what the carbon fee was doing. Whoops. Gradually going up year after year. But check out what the actual cost of energy does. It kind of, it goes up. But then after everyone switched to renewables, like mid-century, it kind of crests off and starts declining, even though carbon's going up. Why? Because we've decarbonized our economy. So now if I do nuclear and take a look at what the cost of energy does, it goes that much further down. Good question.
And then another student asked, what places are going to be underwater in a couple of decades if we don't make any changes?
That is, that's such a sad topic of conversation. Why do we have, okay, no. So let's talk about that. So this is with the graph. Now, unfortunately, all right, so here's what we do. If you wanted to, let's reset everything. This is the model as it is. And we can look at impacts and see like ocean acidification, all that stuff. So sea level rise is just going to continue and continue until the end of the century. It's at 1.2 meters. A meter is roughly a foot, so that's about like 4 or 5 feet. That's, yeah, so, whilst big parts of Manhattan will be underwater, we'll probably get to like Middle Street will still be above water, but Commercial Street won't. We're already seeing it, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen pictures of Marginal Way, or what's the street that Whole Foods is on, or your school, right? Oh,
yeah,
you guys should be. Yeah, your school. They, that's already flooding during full moon high tides, not because of any kind of storm surge, but just because of full moon. I mean, just because it's like a stronger tide than normal. A friend of mine, it runs the Aphodian, the club down that's near you guys down on Bayside, and the city of Portland was telling him, I wouldn't sign a lease for like 10 years. I'd go for like 5 because, but I mean, we will probably have to invest a lot of money to adapt, which means probably storm barriers and stuff. But the sea level rise, if we had this like big carbon price, the sea level rise is the one thing that's kind of unfortunately baked in a little bit, just because we know that if the green, there's a certain amount we're gonna have to live with, because if Greenland, the Greenland ice sheet melts, if I remember these stats correctly, it's 20 meters of sea level rise. 20 meters of sea level rise, that's a lot. If the Antarctic ice sheet melts, that is 200 meters of sea level rise, which means that we're gonna, first of all, there's gonna be no beaches, because beaches take like time to create, right? It's gonna be, I would say we'd be going to the beach in Rangeley, but it's actually just like going from lawn to ocean. Let's have another question. That's kind of a genre.
This one was asking, can students get official trading using the simulator?
I am so glad you asked. Okay, so if you want to climb Nerd Mountain with me, you go down to the model and you click on this thing that says EnRoads Climate Ambassador Training. Ooh. It's really fun. It's really fun. You basically do like web calls, more Zoom calls, or you watch some recordings of them. They are 8 weekly sessions. I've done it twice because I liked it so much. And you basically go down and you can get trained on this here. And then you have to take like a little test, which is not that hard. And in fact, you can cheat and like look at your notes and stuff. It's just a way of making sure you're thinking about things right. And then you do, you get some feedback and then you're done. So you can go to the Climate Interactive website and check that out. Yep.
Awesome. And then what was here?
Or it better said, if you're, so there's two things. I should also say that if you're interested in training for the EnRoads model, that's wonderful. But there's also the Citizens Climate. If you wanted to join us, just send me an email, or and I'd be happy to give you a crash course on how to use the EnRoads model, and share with you why we're so excited about doing this in Maine. And this, sorry, Tyler, but this is something I forgot to say earlier. I had planted this seed saying that we have more of a sway than you would think being Mainers. In the House, there's something called the House Climate Solutions Caucus. Bipartisan group, it's got, I think it's like 42 Republicans, 42 Democrats that get together periodically and talk about how to deal with climate. It has to be even number. There's the same thing in the Senate. We're the only state so Representative Pingree is in the Climate Solutions Caucus. Golden would join if we can find another Republican, but we can't yet. In the Senate, only has 100 members. We're the only state out of all 50 that has both of our senators, both Collins and King, is in the Climate Solutions Caucus. We know that they know about carbon fee and dividend. We know, and we are hearing that they're still meeting with all the other stuff going on in DC, all the drama. They still meet and they still talk about carbon solutions. And our thinking is there's going to be a tremendous potential in the new Congress, whatever happens, and doesn't matter what happens in November. There's going to be a lot of potential to do something coming with the coming terms. So if the more voices we can get between now and then from Mainers or Maine companies, the more likely it is that we'll get King and Collins to join and have this most effective and equitable means of converting to climate stability.
Excellent.
I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt for
Interrupt
just a
away.
minute. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. For anyone who is interested in learning more about how to get involved or how to do a Flex Friday project related to this really important work, Gretchen Yock's Zoom room during the cluster shopping session is where you want to go. And Peter is going to be joining Gretchen to talk to you more about what you could do if this is something you're interested in getting involved with.
So I just want to say thank you so much to Ms. King and to Tyler and to all you students. Thank you so much for letting me prattle on and on about this. I hope that you felt that it was empowering. It's not an easy subject to talk about because yes, it's scary and adults are just as scared as kids are on this one. But there's still a chance for us to do something about this, but we have to act and and I don't get paid for this. I'm just, we're just adults trying to do our best to make for a livable future. So thank you guys, and I hope I see a bunch of you guys soon.
Thank you so much for joining us, Peter, for being our inaugural speaker. This has been really compelling. And I have sent you an email with the Zoom link.